So we've got Glen Wood joining us now, Head of Sales Global at Mitsubishi UFJ Morgan Stanley Securities. Glen, great to have you with us today. I wanted to touch on the Sony story first up. Ronald's emailed in. He wants to make some money on this stock. Should he buy into it at this point?
Hi, Oriel. Hi, Cody. It's good to be back. It's a great question. I think I'd highlight, in answer to that question, I'd highlight what Cody said a minute ago, the phrase unlocking value. I think what we're seeing in Japan as well as in Sony is a true unlocking of value or a rediscovery of value. And I think that's the key focus that investors should look at here in the market and in Sony, indeed. What Mr. Loeb is presenting here is the unlocking of value in what is a great global brand. Sony is known by children and elderly worldwide. And it's a brand that if the value is properly unlocked, it has extraordinary value, far beyond where the current share price is trading.
And what's the best way to do that, Glenn? Is it a spin-off, as he's suggesting?
Well, activism as such is a great market mechanism. It's a great way of unlocking value in a lot of different ways. Whether management has kind of lost the picture or lost the plot in a corporation, or whether a government is trying to benefit certain industries over others when that isn't the direction the market's headed, you need a market mechanism, a vulture, if you will, to come in and regulate some of that. So what he's saying is, let's look at where the value is and separate that piece and see what the true value then is after we separate it. That makes very good sense. Whether it's plausible or not in Japan and with Sony is another question.
What are some of the other names out there where you can see a similar scenario playing out?
Well, one of the biggest ones that we've always talked about for years, and you and I have talked about it before here, is Hitachi, with some 700 subsidiaries with value all over the place. It's very clear that's just a very, very blatant example of where there's a huge amount of value that is waiting to be unlocked.
It's not on your top buy list, though. Is that right, Glenn?
I'm sorry?
It's not on your top buy list. Is that right?
In general, the history of activism in Japan hasn't been a very good one. And if you look back to the Bulldog sauce example, I think that's the precedent that still stands, where the court came in and stepped in and protected Bulldog sauce from being taken over. So in investors' minds, I think the actual, that precedent really stands in the way of these events actually coming to fruition. So I think there's a lot of caution and pessimism around those types of deals. So personally, when I look at stocks, I'd much rather look at fundamental upside, look at where I think the trends in the markets are going, and that's where I look at potential opportunities.
Okay, Glenn, let's talk about those. Where are the potential opportunities? What is on your top buy list at the moment?
Well, one company is Message, which is a company which is really a small cap, which is focused on the demographic trend in Japan. That is one of elderly people. And it's providing a service and services to elderly people that there is a dire need for in Japan right now, and it's doing it at a reasonable price. Management has had some bumps along the way with CBs and whatnot that really disturbed investors, but I think they've learned their lesson, and I think it's a great investment over the next few years.
Can I talk just big picture, Glenn, about this so-called third arrow of Abenomics? I'm not hearing a whole lot of detail on this. Are you a little bit disappointed? I mean, they seem to be getting a little bit sidetracked. He's sending his aid to North Korea. He's had some comments from the Osaka mayor recently as well.
It's a very difficult balance that he's got on his hands, Cowdy, whether it's the issue, as you mentioned, in Korea, or whether it's Yasukuni Jinja matters, and those matters are going to keep coming up. And there's going to be other bumps along the road. We've got TPP negotiations coming up, and we all know that the agricultural lobby in Japan is very strong. That said, the overall message, the general population is 100% behind Abe-on. We've seen years and years of declining bonuses. We've seen deflation. We've had a really rough 20 years in Japan, and people are sick and tired of it. They want some change. And that's what Abe represents, and that's what Kuroda represents. And I think you're going to see that approval rating stay up very high. And we're going to have the election coming up in the summer, and that's going to be telling. And as you said, we need to have some meat on the bones. We need to know what these actual reforms are going to be and how he's going to execute those. That's where the Koizumi reforms fell off. And that's why large global investors are still very cautious when looking at Japan, because they want to see those reforms actually in detail and how they're going to be enacted.
Okay. All right, Glenn, lots to talk about when it comes to Japan at the moment. It's been great to have you with us. Thanks for talking to us here on the show.